Yeah, hello and good afternoon once again. Our 5 minutes is up and we have to start today's program so that our panelists who have very tight schedule can go and join their other schedule for the day. So before I start with the various introduction, let me take members and participants through what we are to expect for today's meeting. So the program is expected to start at 12 to 1:30. We are starting with the welcoming of participants, which will be done by myself. And then that will be followed with the opening remarks, then presentation of the reports, and then we're going to have the group discussion, that's a panel discussion. So having taken members through, and then the final item on our agenda will be the closing remarks. So having taken participants through the program lineup, let me start by introducing the various panelists that we have for today. The first is in the person of Maria Baron, Global Chief Executive Officer, Directorial Legislativo, that is DL, and Executive Director of Parliamentary Network, Mr. Samin Obain. And then we also have Juan Francisco Crow, who is the coordinator of Citizens and Government Institutions Program, also with DL, Directorial Legislativo. After that, we also have on the panel, Philippe Gichana, Head of Policy and Partnerships, Mzalendo Trust, Kenya. And then we have Mr. Regan Wamaji, Programs Manager, Center for Policy Analysis, Uganda. So today's event is on the theme, increasing the political will to promote parliamentary openness in Africa. So since we are already behind time, I would not want to take most of the time. So I will quickly yield the floor to Maria Baron to give us the opening remarks, which will also be followed by that of the Executive Director for Parliamentary Network Africa. So Maria.
Hello, I can't turn my camera on for some reason. It doesn't allow me to. Can you turn it on from your end?
That is okay. You can continue whilst we try from our end if it is possible to put your camera on from here.
Okay, because yes. It says that the host has stopped it or something like that. But while you try, I'll start. First of all, Gilbert, thanks a lot for the introduction, and I'm really, really happy to share this panel with Sami, of course, and one of the 1,000 panels that we've shared so far, and with Philip and Regan as well. I hope we have a really interesting discussion. And just to give an overview of what we have been up to in the past 2.5 years, I think we can say, Sami, so far. We have been sort of engaging with PN Africa for as long as this time so far. Very, very happy that we have continued our sort of stead work together as a part of a South and South cooperation. And I think it's really, really coming in a good shape for us. This has started as a way to explore and find stakeholders from parliaments and from civil society that would want to walk and work towards open parliament in Africa. And we started off engaging and having really strong and deep conversations with 6 countries in Africa, 3 of which are part of this report today, which were, of course, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Uganda, Sierra Leone, and South Africa. And we have had conversations, like I said, with what they were already doing in the different parliaments, not only today, but in the past. So we can see what opportunities we can find for the future and frame all those interesting initiatives in the concept of open parliament, which is something that we will talk today really deeply to. And so I am really, really, again, happy that we have walked all this way and that we have engaged in really deep initiatives that we will see this year and I hope the following years as well. And that's how the commitment and the engagement has been between all of us so far. And I think the novel thing here, besides everything that is happening already in Africa, is that we can engage amongst each other, which we're all of us, not to go into the sad conversation, but from countries that we have really deep problems and that our governments are struggling to overcome them. And we share that sad story in Latin America and Africa, and I think we can engage in creative ways to create ideas and initiatives that are good for our communities. So with that, I'll leave the floor with this really, really brief introduction, hoping that we'll have a really strong and deep conversation today, and we can answer the questions today, or if not, in the future through social networks or whatever we feel is the best channel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. And Sam?
And I think I couldn't, or the camera couldn't be turned on. I think the only one is Sammy.
Okay. I think the host just made you a co-host, so maybe you can give it a try again and see. So whilst you are at it, let me yield the floor to Sammy Obeng, Executive Director of PN Africa, for his welcome address.
Yeah, thank you, Gilbert. Especially when you, as the moderator, is also not having your camera on, it makes it look like I have hijacked the event with me being the only one having his camera on and Maria is unable to do so and all of that. I think the technical team should be able to help us fix this problem so that all of our panelists who have been assembled, now I can see Maria. Okay. So that all of the panelists who have been assembled would be able to join in with their camera. And let me add my voice to the amazing opening remarks that we have had from Maria. Of course, in the thick of the pandemic, when all of us were literally locked down, we are happy and proud that we're able to, begin conversations that led to discussing how we can make the subject of open parliament more popular within our continent of Africa. And we were happy to have then, engaged with Maria, who then served as a global co-chair of the OGP, Open Government Partnership, and her team at Directorio Legislativo. We engaged, like she said, with the various countries as had been mentioned. And of course, we had set for ourselves at the very beginning the purpose of trying to figure out how various national assemblies, parliaments, in this part of the world are committed to the whole concept of open parliaments. And I must say that I was particularly fascinated about some of the results and examples that we saw. And it is quite inspiring that, despite the challenges of COVID and all of the challenges that parliaments face everywhere, still there are some very good shining examples of parliamentary openness. And so we're happy that, 2 years and more than 2 years down the line, we've been able to assemble some of these good practices, good examples, but also have been able to identify some of the things that may not be too good for us to be able to share on this platform today, share some ideas, especially on the occasion of the Open Government Week. And we're happy that all of you have been able to join us. On behalf of the team at Parliamentary Network Africa, let me also add my voice to welcoming you and to thank our partners at Directorio Legislativo, which is based in Argentina, for joining us to do this. But more importantly, also to be able to say thank you to the Center for Policy Analysis in Uganda, Regan and the team that handles the Parliament Watch Uganda, as well as Mzalendo Trust in Kenya, Caroline, Philip, and the team at Mzalendo Trust for working with us, every step through the process and helping to engage with parliamentarians, with parliamentary staff in their respective countries. Of course, working with the OGP office here in Ghana, we're able to facilitate similar conversations. And today we're here to see the results of the conversation. So I'm happy to join you. I am actually joining from Freetown in Sierra Leone, where open parliament conversations have also been taking place a lot with the Parliament Open Day. And I think that it makes for some amazing examples to share. And so over to you, Gilbert, and I look forward to an amazing conversation.
Thank you very much, Sam. And we move on to a very important aspect of today's event, which is the presentation of the report on the to assess the political will to advance open parliaments in Africa and to also enhance the effective delivery of sustainable open parliament reforms. Now, to do that for us is one, Francisco Kra, and one Francisco Kra is the coordinator of Citizens and Government Institution Program with Directorio Legislativo, DL. One has been very active and a key part of putting this report together. And we are privileged to have him doing the presentation of the report. So Juan, your audience.
Well, hello, everyone. Good morning from Argentina. Good afternoon to everyone joining from Ghana, from Kenya, Uganda, and other parts of the world. It is an honor to be here, and thank you so much, Maria and Sami, for your opening remarks, and Gilbert for your moderation. So I'm going to share screen now, so I can share with you a short PPT presentation that encompasses the main aspects of the report that we're very proud to be presenting today, as it was a very fruitful conversations we had throughout last year. So I think you can see now. Can you? Yes. Cool. Yes, I can see Sami. And I'm glad that you can see me, because I thought you weren't going to be able to do it. So yeah. As you know, the report is called Open Parliament Conversations in Africa, and the main idea is to kind of show and to assess the political will to advance open parliament, specifically in 3 countries, as Maria and Sami mentioned. The original conversations began with 6 countries, which were Nigeria, South Africa, Sierra Leone, Kenya, Uganda, and Ghana. And for this first phase, we decided to advance with the last 3 countries I mentioned, Kenya, Uganda, and Ghana. But you know that after we do these presentations, of course, we would love to carry on working not only with these 3 countries, but also with Nigeria, South Africa, and Sierra Leone. So as you will see in the report is kind of divided on like, for the three countries, it is divided in kind of the same structure. First of all, it gives an assessment of what is happening at that particular moment. We had the conversations we were like a few months ago last year, in terms, of course, of open parliament. And then also it kind of highlights the main topics that were discussed during these engagements we had between Directorio Legislativo, PNAfrica, and local stakeholders in the three countries that we are presenting today. Of course, like PMOs, for example, in Kenya, we engaged with Mzalendo Trust. In Uganda, we engaged with Center for Policy Analysis, and in Ghana with, well, PNAfrica, among other PMOs, and of course we also engage with members of parliaments of those three countries. And just like I mentioned, the main idea is to see at what stage is the political will in those three countries, and to think of some recommendations and some alternatives and courses of actions to try to push forward that political will to advance with open parliament. So, well, just like I was mentioning, the report is kind of divided into this structure of what is happening at the moment, what topics were discussed in the conversations, and finally, what the next steps in our belief they should be. So that's kind of the general structure. And to start with, well, we have here the first country that appears in the report, which is Kenya. So the first topic the first thing that is discussed is the status of parliamentary openness in Kenya, and it portrays both actions undertaken by parliamentary monitoring organizations and actions undertaken by the Parliament of Kenya. And in that regard, during that conversation, Mzalendo Trust, which I'm really happy that we have one of our colleagues of Mzalendo Trust here to join the panel afterwards. There were some things discussed in terms of, for example, what had Mzalendo Trust been doing at the moment to foster parliamentary openness. So one of the things that were discussed is that given that Kenya is a member of OGP and it has issued several open like national action plans, Mzalendo Trust have been working really hard in including and working on commitments included in those national action plans that have to do with legislative openness. So, for example, one of the things that they mentioned was that among these open or like legislative openness commitments, including in the national action plans, there was a specific point of developing a tool or like a toolkit to foster not only legislative transparency but also public participation. So we were discussing this idea and the usefulness that technological tools have for increasing that parliamentary openness and the public participation. Other things that were highlighted during the conversations were the importance of facilitating live coverage of parliamentary proceedings. That, for example, Mzalendo really focuses on that, on like releasing information on what is happening at the Senate and at the National Assembly as well, and developing also like other open data platforms to access to more information on that regard. And I remember that one of the things that were also mentioned as a kind of as an idea of or a plan that would be great to work on is of this, which is actually something that is happening today, is to work on like regional conversations to showcase what is actually happening in Kenya, what PMOs in Kenya are doing, and what are other PMOs in other countries of Africa doing as well, to kind of learn to foster these peer learning experiences. And in the case of Parliament, of the Parliament of Kenya, some of the actions that were highlighted were this initiative of developing a bill tracker to enable citizens to contribute and to participate in the legislative processes, especially, of course, during this pandemic time that we have all been working from home, and we have relied on technological tools to normal things in life. So that kind of the general conversation that we had, and kind of the status of the situation that was in the conversation we had last year. So just maybe to give you a sneak peek of the panel that will come afterwards this presentation, the idea will be to talk not only of what kind of I'm kind of presenting at the moment, but also to see advances and developments throughout between last year and today, of course, regarding open parliaments. So kind of the just like I mentioned, the report is structured in like what is happening at the moment, what PMOs and the parliament is doing, and also what next steps and recommendations we think should be kind of implemented from our perspective to foster open parliament in Kenya in this case. So one of the things that were mentioned is that social media, like different social media applications were used at the moment, but perhaps Parliament could make the most of them, could use them more. So one way or one issue that we thought could be useful to implement was something that will foster public participation, but also parliamentary openness and transparency as to what is happening at the parliament at the moment. So for example, it could be the drafting of a parliamentary magazine that could be issued and disseminated through social media, the Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, in form of a video in that case, mailing applications and other, for example, and of course, phone applications. And for other recommendation coming from the discussion that we had was this idea of organizing roundtables for CSOs and members of Parliament to engage, to further engage them, both actors, in more deep conversations, and to enhance not only what could be open Parliament initiatives, but also like OGP processes in general, given that Kenya is a member of OGP. And thematic discussions could also include, for example, like topics, of course, that are being addressed by Parliament at the moment to kind of nurture the legislative debates. And also like other perhaps useful tools could be, or useful initiatives would be to further include like public hearings and the promotions of and the elaboration of platforms to comment on bills. And the third thing has to do with something that I mentioned before, that is something that is happening today, just like I said, of this idea of participating in both for Parliament and maybe for PMOs as well, to participate in regional discussions, to learn, for example, from the parliamentary perspective, to learn what is happening in other parliaments, either good practices and sometimes as well like mistakes or things that could be improved, and to learn how those challenges or things have been overcame, you know. And for PMOs as well, to learn how other PMOs and CSOs are working in different countries, of course, to learn about just like I said, about common challenges and good practices in fostering and engaging with Parliament to promote open Parliament. So that's kind of the idea of the general situation and some of the recommendations that we thought for Kenya. There is more information actually on the report, so I invite you to visit it once the presentation is over. And something that I didn't mention, but if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them or to give any insights. So that's the case for Kenya. Then the second country is Uganda, and that is the same structure for like the three countries. Kind of the general idea of what is the status of parliamentary openness at the moment we have the conversation, and some next steps and recommendations taking into account that kind of situation that we were discussing back then. Perhaps an interesting point to mention that differently from Kenya and Ghana, Uganda is actually not a member of OGP, so that kind of have some impact on strategies to promote open parliament, but nevertheless, it was really good to see that there is a very vibrant PMO landscape in Uganda, and of course, and the parliament as well are really, both PMOs and the parliament are really working on promoting open parliament, regardless of not being member of Uganda, of not being a member of OGP. So in that sense, for example, some of the topics that were mentioned during our discussion with PMOs and the Parliament of Uganda. In that sense, the Parliament of Uganda mentioned that some initiatives undertaken to promote parliamentary openness, including accrediting journalists from different media to cover and report on parliamentary business, and to kind of give the most access possible to public information and on public business happening in Parliament. Parliament as well holds annual legislative sector reviews to kind of provide an accountability of what Parliament is doing on parliamentary performance. They actually mentioned an example that there is in 2021. There is a monitoring and evaluation office that produced a legacy report accounting for a 5-year performance of the Parliament, what had done, what hasn't done, what had not done, and things like that. Parliament as well signed a memorandum of understanding between or with external actors that included PMOs and that included as well other actors such as universities and academia. And perhaps one of the most outstanding things that were mentioned, and maybe that should, last but not least, is that they have developed a phone app. It's called Bungenia, that allows citizens to kind of contribute to bills and debates on the House, so they can see what bills are being discussed, and they can kind of send comments to those bills under discussion. And from the PMO perspective, some of the work that had been undertaken has to do with building the capacity, the legislative capacity of MPs and parliamentary staff, and the notions on open parliament. And they have also participated in the organizations and carried out events on like getting to know what the parliament is doing to connect Parliament with the general public. There is an event, or a week-long event called a Parliament Week, for example, in Uganda. And taking all that into consideration and other topics that were discussed in the open discussion we had with PMOs and the Parliament of Uganda, which you can see in the report, we thought of like some next steps and recommendations that could be useful to implement, at least from our perspective, that has to do with given that Uganda is not a member of OGP, and there is like a lot of interesting work happening and a lot of potential, it could be useful to, from the CSO perspective, to identify and build a network of open parliament champions that include both MPs and also like Congress or parliament staff, because you know that MPs might come and go, but usually parliamentary staff is the one that stays throughout the years. And also this notion of like try to put open parliament on the table as much as possible, to this idea of agenda setting. So taking into account the previous thing that I mentioned, to identifying and building a network of open parliament champions, and also further engagement with CSOs or PMOs and other actors such as the academia to create several themes concerning open parliament, to kind of to build this momentum to foster open parliament in Uganda. So that's kind of the general idea of this country number 2 of the report, which is Uganda. And the third one is Ghana. In this case, similar to Kenya, Ghana has been a member of OGP for quite a lot of time, since 2011, and it has implemented, I think they're actually in the 4th National Action Plan. So in that sense, the same as before, what kind of actions have been undertaken by PMOs and the Parliament of Ghana, and some of the things that we discussed in our conversation was that, for example, in the case of the Parliament, there is a kind of like public information has been progressively being available to the public after the passage of the Right to Information Act. So, for example, some of the pieces of information and pieces of legislative work that have been put to disposal to the public has to do with the parliamentary agenda, minutes of sittings of the House, and they're published either like on the website and on mobile applications of the Parliament. And also there has been more openness in terms of like the public being able to contact committees in Parliament to offer contributions, to share their thoughts on bills under discussions on like or something that has to do with the parliamentary business, and to share recommendations on bills and other businesses that are being discussed at that moment. There's also quite a promoted use of press briefings to inform citizens about the agenda of the Parliament, of what is being discussed at that day and what committees are meeting on that particular moment. And from the PMO perspective, there was kind of an intention to show some of the actions that are being undertaken, but at the same time with connecting that to some work that should be done by some things that could be improved by Parliament. And this has to do, for example, with this notion of the engagement between CSOs or PMOs and Parliament members, which usually is like on a more informal relationships, to given that there is a low level of MP and constituent interaction, and sometimes it's a bit costly for PMOs to host events or to host meetings with MPs in Ghana. And there has been a lot of work from the PMO perspective to foster the publication of asset declarations to kind of help the citizenry and PMOs as well to monitor and to verify assets that are owned by public officials. So that's kind of the main, or some of the main advocacy issues that have been promoted by PMOs in Ghana. And some of the next steps and recommendations that we thought we thought could be useful to implement in Ghana has to do with these things that I was mentioning. First of all, we try to further the engagements with PMOs in this regard, that Parliament should engage with PMOs more regularly through more institutional conversations rather than informal conversations, and to hold, for example, public hearings to ensure that there is kind of enough collaboration between the Parliament and the citizenry. And also this idea of foster or promote engagements with citizens. From our perspective, maybe Parliament should try to improve and resource its in-person educational engagements with students that are, for example, in school, in that sense, to foster civic education on parliamentary businesses and what is happening in Parliament, and to include the youth in politics. Maybe that also Parliament should ensure that there is regular communication through online and traditional and social through media, and of course social media networks. And this idea that perhaps I didn't mention before, but something really positive about Ghana is that there is an open Parliament task team in Parliament that has been doing some work throughout these years, but perhaps it could be reinvigorated through perhaps co-creation with PMOs of different objectives and different courses of action that could foster open Parliament in Ghana. So that's kind of the general idea of Ghana. And to round up, I hope I didn't take too much long and then I didn't bore you. Perhaps this idea or this question of, is there any political will to advance open parliament in Africa, or at least in these 3 countries? Of course, there is like perhaps with drawing from some of the ideas that I mentioned or I shared with you, but of course, I invite you to check the report. There is a lot of work happening that have been happening for quite a lot of time. It's not something that began last year or this year, not at all. There's lots of things happening. I mentioned, well, examples for Kenya, Uganda, and Ghana. So there is a lot of work, and there is political will that, of course, can always, in every country, that happens in Africa, that happens in Latin America as well. There's always more to be done and more discussions and more actions that can be undertaken. And maybe to round up these 4 last ideas, and I'll finish. The importance, please remember that it is very important to engage with actors that are interested in open parliament, both members of parliament, Congress staff, or parliament staff of parliament, and well, CSOs, PMOs, academia, because that consensus and that teamwork always lead to the best results. The second topic is something that we've been implementing in Latin America, and I'm aware that our colleagues from PN Africa are also very interested in doing so. This notion of this idea of developing a tool to assess how open national parliaments are. In Latin America, we implement something that is called the Latin American Legislative Transparency Index. And it is very useful. It's an objective measurement that throughout some indicators and some questions, it gives you kind of a final score of how parliament, or yes, how open parliament is. And I mean, even you've got like a final score, but from that score, there are like lots of recommendations and useful things that are recommended from a CSO's perspective for Parliament to perhaps undertake. The third, perhaps important thing to remember from our perspective would be to enhance communications to the public regarding open Parliament actions. This idea that, for example, in Uganda, involving the youth and well, other things that I also mentioned for Kenya and Ghana, and also the use of social media and everything. And of course, well, finally making open Parliament a priority or in the legislative agenda. So I think that's all. I've seen there's a few comments, but I don't know if those are questions or not. But if you have any questions or any comments, I'll be happy to address. And so I'll stop sharing. Thank you very much. And I'll drink some water as well.
Thank you very much, Juan, for a wonderful presentation. We are going to move on to the next stage of the program, which is the panel discussion. And before I do that, let me introduce one more panelist who was not in the meeting earlier on. Ms. Kate Addo is the Director of Public Affairs of Ghana's Parliament. And Ms. Kate Addo will be joining the panelists. And we would also want to take the opportunity to ask Sam and Maria to also join the panelists. And we'll ask questions of the panelists. I will have Juan. Juan, you have to also join me to do the moderation at this bit. I know you've just finished the presentation, you need to take water, but after that, you join me to do the moderation for this session. So this report, as Juan mentioned, was compiled, the interviews were done almost a year ago. Now, up to now, what has been the development after these interviews? So let me probably start with Philip Gichana, Head of Policy and Partnerships.
Yes, thank you very much, Gilbert. I hope you can hear me all.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, the unfortunate part is also that I can't turn on my video. I don't know what is the problem with the settings. It's telling me something to do with the camera and all that. I don't know why is that. But thank you very much, Gilbert. A very timely discussion, especially for us here in Kenya. And thank you, Juan, for the presentation in terms of the discussions. I didn't realize that, the discussions that we've been having lately, and it falls in the backdrop of when we've just had a regional conference in the country to discuss the parliament initiatives together with Sami also in the call. So one, I would wish to say that much of what has been highlighted, there won't be a lot that has really changed in terms of when the report was done and now. And maybe that has to do with also that maybe this period hasn't been one of the most productive period, especially for us as a country, considering that we are just 2 months into an election in Kenya. And as such, the kind of structures that we've had from the last, or rather the last 5 years are still the kind of structures that we are working with. And maybe this now further informs that maybe going forward, that after the elections, that there is quite a lot of work to do in terms of enhancing parliamentary openness and even the partnerships that we do have that enhance public participation in the country. So when it comes to maybe the developments, I think nothing much in terms of what has been coming up. Maybe if I'm allowed to proceed to discuss maybe the level of also the recommendations that come with the report. I don't know if that was also part of the discussion that I'm supposed to go on. Yes.
Yeah, in that sense, thank you so much, Philip. Philip, yes, feel free to address those recommendations or to share your insights or something that, of course, being you on the ground and since there have been a few months that have passed since we had our conversations, any other opinion or insights is more than welcome. So please feel free to address that as well. And after that, we will continue with our colleagues from Uganda and Ghana.
Yeah. So thank you very much. That clarifies it, Juan. Thank you. Maybe just to highlight some of the recommendations, I think that came up is the issue of a parliamentary magazine. That hasn't been able to be done, and it's something that we, especially us as Mzalendo Trust, would really consider. Maybe also just when engaging government, engaging parliament in our advocacy meetings, we'd also be pushing for that, and also trying to ensure that we could have also a similar of that. But one thing that I wish to highlight is that now I'm relatively also not very old in Mzalendo, but I have realized, and we've been engaging in a lot of regional discussion, and especially to enhance also peer learning. I think this has happened, and I highlighted in the first instance that just a few weeks ago, we were having a parliamentary, Pan-African parliamentary engagement in this sides of the region, where we had quite a number of organizations that were able to learn. And it was really shocking that quite a number of people really never even knew their representatives at the PAP. So then it proves very impossible to engage really when you even you don't know who are your representatives at PAP, at the PAP level. The other initiative that I wish to highlight for us, and we coming into an end of the 5-year term of this, the 12th House. And what we're trying to do really at the moment is come up with also like an analysis and an evaluation of what Parliament has done for the last 5 years in what we are trying to look at what we can call a legislative compendium for that matter. And what that highlights us, and even from the initial discussions and highlights, is that while a number of legislations have been, we've had quite a number of engagements on legislations, the same has not been true, especially public participation on motions that are tabled in the House and even petitions. So that is something that we would seek to really engage Parliament further in terms of how they handle the petitions that are filed at Parliament. So maybe that would be all. Would I light for now? Maybe if there are any questions, I would be happy to respond.
Okay, so one.
Thank you, Philip. Yes, no, something that I took notes of everything that Philip said, but something maybe interesting to think ahead, not only for you guys in Kenya, but for everyone in other countries. This notion of like participating in regional exchanges, it's very interesting. What you mentioned, that a few weeks ago there was an exchange at the Pan-African level. So that speaks greatly of how organized PMOs are in the region, and how willing they are to foster these peer learning experiences. So maybe something to take into or to think of would be, as from Directorio being a Latin American organization, could be great to foster this, like something that I think Maria or Sami mentioned before, was this like south exchanges and collaborations to see like common challenges and experiences happening at the Latin American and the African level. I think that would be really cool as well.
Very true.
So maybe it would be good to listen to the reactions of Rican in this case, and maybe to also tell us if there have been any other developments that took place throughout these last few months, and maybe any other thoughts or insights on a few recommendations, just like Philip mentioned. I don't know if Philip, sorry, Rick, you're there.
Hi, good afternoon, Juan. I don't know if it's afternoon, it's it's coming to 4 p.m. in Kampala. So I don't know what time it is there, but it's good to have you and to be on this call. And I'm really grateful that we've continued to have these conversations from the time we started. It's also good to have to be speaking after Philip. I know Mzalendo is one of the organizations that, as Parliament Watch Uganda, we drew a lot of inspiration and insights from, because we do similar work. And so I think it's a shame that we haven't had as many interactions as we should, considering that Parliament Watch and Mzalendo are more or less the same. And yeah, so that's something that Philip, we need to think about and pick on after this conversation. But a couple of things really. One is to say that from the time we started having these conversations up to now, not much has changed in terms of progress, either on the recommendations that were made, because one, this is yesterday we concluded the first year of this new parliament. And so with every parliament, there's new leadership. And so it takes a while before a lot of the changes that you'd want to see happen. But one of the things that I'm so happy about has been the great commitment and interest that the new leadership of our parliament has had, especially in certain areas like openness. And I'll explain in a few what that has looked like. So we've been operating under a pandemic, right? So what that meant was that access to parliament for a lot of people, civil society, journalists, was limited, yeah? But we saw that the committees of parliament, for instance, were willing to adopt virtual engagement with civil society on particular bills that were all processes that they were handling within the committees. There was a lot more collaboration between the parliament media department with journalists, because they are not being able to, access the premises physically. And so that has been a good show of faith in terms of how open and engaging that they've been. Of course, there are other challenges that I'll talk briefly about, but one of the things that I think, even as we think about what we need to do as PMOs or as civil society, is emphasizing the point you made in the recommendations of working with the parliament staff, because these ones usually stay longer, and cultivating relations with the parliament staff and the departments of parliament has been very critical for us in Uganda, because there's a lot of continuity in terms of the goodwill and cooperation, even as the political leadership comes and goes. So that has been quite interesting. In terms of what I feel is an area that moving forward as a recommendation, or what I see as a challenge that we're still grappling with, is that when it comes to enhancing citizen participation, there is still this elitist way in which engagements with parliament are conducted when it comes to citizens. First of all, a lot of the people that parliament serves are people who obviously don't have access. Most of them may not understand the language, or do not have the ability or luxury of engaging with the legislators or with parliament. And so that means there has to be a deliberate attempt from parliament to reach out to grassroots communities, grassroots everyday Ugandans, so that they solicit their views. Usually what happens is whenever there's an issue that is before the floor of parliament, they'll issue a call circular asking people to submit their views or to come and present memorandum before parliamentary committees, and which is very good. And that's where a lot of civil society organizations have had the benefit and opportunity to engage with parliament. But I feel there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of outreaches, so that ordinary Ugandans get to participate or contribute to legislative processes. I know right now that's a gap that civil society plays or tries to cover, but it would be interesting or important that parliament goes out of its way to engage. So there's that. And then the other aspect for us is not just for parliament, but the media space within Uganda, which in turn, of course, affects how we cover and report on parliament. So of course, there's a lot of censorship and high-handedness with which media is dealt with in Uganda. And so those of us who are part of the Parliamentary Press Association, sometimes you have to be mindful of how and what you cover when you're reporting on parliament, for fear of sometimes could be reprisal or in how you might be treated afterwards. So that has often forced many journalists sometimes not to cover as openly as they should, which is a shame, really. But yeah, it's something that we always think about. And even us as Parliament Watch, and I'll be honest, we are a parliamentary monitoring organization that has this unfettered access within Parliament. But that access comes with a price. So you have to, you don't want to upset sometimes, say things that might upset the leadership, because then that might affect your access. So you end up having this sort of self-censorship, which is not helpful. But I think it's still an amazing relationship that we hold. On the plus side, though, the one thing that I'm really grateful for when it comes to our parliament, even though, as you rightly mentioned, Uganda is not part of the OGP, is the fact that as the institution, they have made it a point to be as transparent as possible. And that is reflected in how information is made readily available. But in whether or not that information is available in a language that ordinary people can learn, listen to, or even understand, that's a discussion for another day, but something we need to think quite critically around. But also in the open will to get people to contribute to legislative processes. That is quite interesting. And so for us, even as we move forward, one of the key recommendations I know that we discussed in this report, which was also something that the Monitoring and Evaluation Department of Parliament suggested in the last meeting we had, was around how we build champions among the legislators and the parliamentary staff, and how we continuously ensure that some of these practices are entrenched as part of the parliamentary procedure, so that transparency, access to information, citizen participation are by and large entrenched within the governing rules of parliament, so that it's not just something that we get on the goodwill of the leadership, but something that is, as a matter of right, provided for in the law. Thank you so much. That's all I can say about the experience of Uganda this far.
Thank you very much, Philip. So we now give the platform to Kate Abdul. I think Kate's line dropped. Okay, so whilst we try to get Kate back online, maybe this question would go to Sam. So Sam, so the point is, so what are your plans after this report has, now that the report is out, we are now having the discussion with regards to the report. What are the next steps for PN Africa and Dion with regards to this report? So Sam, and then after that, I think Maria can also take a bite at the question.
Right, thank you, Gilbert. For me, the last 2.5 years has shown that truly there is a lot that's going on so far as parliamentary openness is concerned on the African continent. Maybe in the past we had not focused on it too much, but it's about time that we start to do a lot more focusing on it, and this report serves as a first step, you know, in that regard. It was great hearing from Philip and Regan on, you know, some of the actions that they have seen even beyond the period that we actually had engagement with them on the report. And I must say that beyond the period that we had engagement on this report, there's been quite a lot that has also happened on the continent, coordinated by PN Africa together with our partners, both at Meslendo, at Directorio Legislativo, from the perspective of the African Parliamentary Monitoring Organizations Network and what have you. And maybe let me share a few with you. So first is that in the last couple of months, there has been conscious efforts to set up parliamentary monitoring organizations networks in about 11 West African countries, you know, which had been coordinated by PN Africa. And the essence of this is that when we have more civil society organizations within various countries getting to hear the gospel of parliamentary openness and pushing very much for it, that is when we get to see a lot more of these reforms. And that is where we get to achieve, you know, some success stories within their respective national parliaments. And so whether it is, I mean, from Liberia to Sierra Leone, to Cote d'Ivoire, to Burkina Faso, even before the coup, to the Gambia, to Niger, Benin, and what have you, we have successfully supported civil society organizations in there to set up PMO networks, parliamentary monitoring organizations networks. And these networks have already had some form of engagement with their respective national parliaments. And parliaments have already shown some level of commitment towards working with civil society organizations, in this regard. And there's some very brilliant examples that we have seen along the way. For example, in Sierra Leone, we've had Parliament sign a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, with civil society organizations to say that, look, we are now going to have a civil society desk in Parliament so that information from Parliament can reach civil society more promptly. We're going to have regular engagement between civil society organizations and Parliament. There's been a strategic plan and a new communications plan for that particular Parliament, which is seeking to showcase a lot more transparency, accountability, and openness, which is a very good positive about, parliamentary openness initiatives happening in various places. In fact, just last week, I was privileged to have joined the Open Parliament Day or Open Parliament Week here in Sierra Leone, where, not only did they open Parliament up to citizens in the capital city, Freetown, but these sessions and engagement with members of Parliament were streamed live in the various provinces, so in the districts, through the power of technology. And Parliament had a very interesting, transparent measure of putting out its annual report, including its financials, out to the people, and these were published in booklets, which were actually distributed to people who were available and published online. And we thought that these are quite, interesting happenings, all over the place. Very soon, and I would encourage you all to mark in your calendars, specifically on the 30th of June this year, which will be the International Day of Parliamentarism, or popularly known as the World Parliament Day. We have, with the support of Directorio Legislativo and our other partners within the Open Parliament Network, or the Parliamentary Monitoring Organizations Network in Africa, have initiated an index on parliamentary openness, like one was talking about. This is going to measure the various West African countries on their level of openness. So how transparent, how accountable, and how are citizens' participation been embedded in the work of the various parliaments within West Africa, as well as the ECOWAS Parliament, which is the parliament for the regional parliament for West Africa, and the Pan-African Parliament. So this is also going to happen. And we know that our friends at Mzalendo Trust have also been coordinating the PMO network in Kenya, are starting some work around the East African region. We are also aware that, there are conversations taking place even in countries like DR Congo, and the likes, wanting to hear more about this whole concept of open parliament. And so for me, there's a lot happening when it comes to parliamentary openness in Africa. There is so much that can be achieved. It requires that all of us are pushing very, very hard, are committing to this particular task. And at Parliamentary Network Africa, we are very confident that we are going to be keeping to this task of pushing parliaments to be open, to be transparent, to be accountable, and to encourage citizens' participation in their work, because we know the benefits that comes with it. It's unfortunate that the line for the Director for Public Affairs of the Parliament of Ghana dropped. But I know that in the Ghana case, for example, although there's been some positives, there is still a lot of stagnation, happening when it comes to open parliament in Ghana after the report. So after the report, there's been the National Action Plan 4, and for the very first time, there is a chapter in the National Action Plan which focuses on parliamentary openness. Of course, in the past, it has always been parliamentary actions such as legislative actions and what have you. This time around, there is a chapter, which is a good thing, and we are looking at pursuing it. Although not much has actually happened beyond that. There is the Open Parliament Task Team that one spoke about, a very positive initiative. However, it has also been very much stagnating. I know Ms. Ado is a member of the tax team, and so it was one of the things that I was hoping that she'll be able to tell us when we are going to see the tax team drive back to action. But it's a bittersweet experience in many parts of our continent when it comes to openness. In some places, there are some positives that are happening, but there is still more room for improvement. In some places, there are some stagnation, but we'll still not stop short in pushing for parliamentary openness all throughout. So I think I'll end it here, Gilbert, with some of the things that have been happening and some of the next steps that we are looking at, even at Parliamentary Network Africa and our partners.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam. Maybe Maria can have a bite, then Juan, you can take over for the next question.
Thank you, Gilbert. I wanted to address one question that's in the chat, a really interesting one, and also something that I think Reagan was saying earlier about how to build or create sort of those champions that we need to take this word and this gospel forward about openness, because I think it's linked. So the question is, how can open parliament initiatives advocate for sort of the regional obligations that the different governments or countries have, for example, SDGs, the 2030 agenda, etc. So I think the interesting thing about open parliament plans, which you don't need to be in OGP, this is for the Ugandan colleagues, you don't need to be in OGP to sort of create an open parliament action plan. You can, as an organization or as an advocate for openness, you can bring this idea to the parliamentarians, and you can negotiate if that is possible or not. So there's no sort of formal or formalities that you need to address. So it's a free offering in a way to the parliaments and the parliamentarians. And so I think I was saying the interesting thing about creating a plan, which is sort of an idea, a wish list, or a negotiated wish list with the parliament and the parliamentarians, that it's an open, it's a blank page. So for this, you need to sort of have a mini cohort of organizations or of champions from civil society, and a couple of parliamentarians, or a group, a mini group of parliamentarians that are willing to address that in the parliament. And in that, you can engage in conversations and start filling that blank page. There are many examples of really interesting initiatives that have been included in a plan. The interesting thing about the plan, it's that it is a commitment. It's written down, and all of the parties that participate in that agree on it. Then, of course, it's a different story, and it depends on other variables if that gets implemented or how well that gets implemented. But it depends heavily, I would say, that part on the muscle that the organizations put on it, and how much pressure the organizations put on the parliamentarians and the parliament to be able to implement those ideas. But you can bring those ideas to the conversations with the parliament and the parliamentarians about, so in Latin America, for example, there are committees that only address the Agenda 2030, or the 2030 agenda. Or you can bring, like Sami was saying, ideas of parliament action. So creating bills around to be able for the country to implement the 2030 agenda. And so that depends on the needs and the capabilities of the country itself. And then, and that's why I was saying it's the other side of the same coin, the ability that the organizations have to keep creating champions in parliament all the time, because as we know, in all of our countries, those the parliamentarians, come and go, and they get reelected maybe one time, but then not so much. And so you need to create those interested minds in the parliament. Of course, in these three countries, you already have champions, but sometimes you need to get sort of, I don't know, champions in the leadership, champions in the majority party that leads parliament. So that is an ongoing exercise. And if you do, like in Latin America, for example, we've been doing it for such a long time that many of the, and also just up in between brackets, it's not only that you need champions in the MPs, but you need champions, like someone was saying earlier, in the staff. And in, like I was saying, in Latin America, we've been doing it for such a long time that many of those, not so many, but some of those staffers are now MPs. So it's a long road, but those sort of MPs bring the openness agenda as their first item in the list that they will champion within the parliament. So those are in already. So for example, I don't know, just to give you an example, in Colombia, parliamentarians get re-elected, don't get re-elected so much as in other countries. So you need to all the time find those minds that in between the agenda that they have, I don't know, maybe infrastructure, education, poverty, whatever, you need to sneak in the transparency. And you can do that in two ways, very simple. You can do it as an issue, like a standalone issue, transparency in parliament or in whatever area of government you want, or you can do that as a cross-cutting issue. So maybe engage in that conversation with the MP to include transparency in infrastructure and transparency in education, transparency in whatever issue that they are working in the exercise in Latin America. And with this, I'll close. We, for many times, have found that the high leadership MPs, which are the MPs that you need also to bring sort of more push within the parliament, we have been more successful in including transparency in a thematic agenda than transparency as a standalone issue. And so, I don't know, transparency in the budget, for example, and those, you have a lot of MPs that are very high up in the ranking sphere of the parliaments, that of the parties, that can buy in a way that side of what they are already advocating. So just to summarize, it's a long way and many years to go. So you need to start with the staffers and pray for those staffers to continue in the political career and then become MPs or ministers. In some cases in Latin America, we have ministers that bring that as their first standalone issue. Second, go, even if you're not in OGP, go for an open parliament plan that you can negotiate with the parliament and the parliamentarians, and the champion seeking is a never-ending story.
Thank you very much, Maria. And in the audience, I noticed we have some of the people from the Gambia, and I am aware that the Gambia at the moment are putting plans in place to get enlisted on the OGP. So this question particularly goes to Regan, considering that Uganda is not yet part of the OGP, and yet you guys are doing so much. Can you share some of your experiences with our colleagues from the Gambia who are trying to put their house in order to join the OGP? Regan, are you there?
Yeah, come again. I missed that.
Yes, so I was saying that some of our colleagues from, especially the OSPG, is leading the drive to get the Gambia enlisted on OGP to become an OGP member country, and they are putting in a lot of effort. And I'm saying that considering that Uganda is not yet part of the OGP, and yet you guys are doing so much, can you share some of your experience with our colleagues from the Gambia to help them in their process in becoming a member of the OGP, as you yourself also work on the same processes to be enlisted onto the OGP?
So thank you so much. So for me, because of the experiences that a lot of the organizations that were pushing for Uganda to become a member of the OGP and the frustrations that they had, our focus has been even in the absence of Uganda being a member of the OGP, how do we promote transparency and openness within the institutions of government, but also parliament, where we have a vested interest. And so I don't know whether or not as SEPA or as Parliament Watch, that is something we'll still pursue. But what we want to do is continue working to make sure that government agencies and Parliament in particular remains open and transparent. Because also there's a lot of politics for us when it comes to trying to get Uganda to join. And this is rooted in the fact that there are so many commitments that our government makes, but does not fulfill in terms of international obligations that we are privy to. And so, yeah, we are trying to go slow on getting ourselves into that whole political process again. But in terms of trying as much as possible to work with the institutions of government, I think what is important is to raise the utility of open processes and what that means for citizens and their relationship with their government. And that's where for us, we try to bank especially on, because it's in the interest of the government that the citizens are aware of what they're doing. It's in the interest of the government that all government agencies and departments, for them to have that direct connection and engagement with the public on so many of the work that they do. Because at the end of the day, it becomes easy to account, really. And so for me, that's the focus that we rely on. But from what you're saying, I think that means it would be us, really, to learn from the colleagues from the Gambia, what they're doing, and then see if there's something that we can pick from them in the event that we want to work with some of these other organizations to try this push again for Uganda to join. I think there's more lessons for us from them, and that's something that we'll be interested in reaching out and trying to learn from them, I suppose.
Okay, thank you very much, Regan. Looking at, we are almost out of time. One, I don't know whether we can give the remaining few minutes to the audience, if there is any question from the audience participants. If not, then we can have the Mr. Obeng giving us the closing remarks, and we'll call it a day. So in the audience, if you have a question, can you raise up your hand?
Gilbert, I think that this is structured as a webinar, and so members of the audience can only type in their questions and may not be able to necessarily speak to. I think that access is not granted to members of the audience, but they can type in their questions or their remarks. The communications team can correct me if I'm wrong on this.
I think we can allow them to talk.
Yes, I see that Reginald Robertson is raising the hand. So yes. I'll click on allow to speak, and please, Reginald.
Yes, so that's what
Hi there.
I'm trying to see. Yes, I think Reginald, you can ask your question.
First and foremost, I would want to commend the Parliamentary Network Africa for a good job done. and putting this webinar through for us. And I would also want to commend you for the work you are putting in to see to it that we have an open parliament in these 3 countries that you've made mention of. For me in Ghana, I think that the efforts that are being put in place for an open parliament is really on course. But what I want to ask is, what is our plan and focus for regional blocks of parliament, and then even the African continent, that is the parliament, PAP itself? Because the last time PAP was in South Africa to even reconstitute itself, we saw what really happened. How best are we drawing home the openness to the continental parliament as a whole, whilst we are working bit by bit from what is happening in our various countries? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reginald. So any of the panelists can take response to Reginald's question.
Yes, Gilbert, if I may quickly, and Reginald, that's a beautiful question. Of course, all parliaments must be open, transparent, accountable, and include citizens in their work, not only the national parliament. And so ECOWAS parliament must be open, the Pan-African parliament must be open, the East African Legislative Assembly, YALA, must be open, and all of that. And you asked what steps are being taken. So one of the things is that in recent times, the West African Parliamentary Monitoring Organizations Network have actually gone to pay a courtesy call on the ECOWAS Parliament and have spoken about issues relating to parliamentary openness. The ECOWAS Parliament is actually going to be included in the assessment that gets done on parliamentary openness in West Africa. The reports, the index that I said, the Open Parliament Index that I said will be released later in June, to be able to see how open the ECOWAS Parliament are, so that the recommendations, civil society can now work with the ECOWAS Parliament to implement the recommendations that makes them better and even more open. Of course, the same situation can be said for the Pan-African Parliament, which is going to be included in the index as well. But for the Pan-African Parliament, there is so much also that can be done or needs to be done, because like you rightly noted, we saw the debacle that happened, in Midrand, South Africa, when they tried to reconstitute themselves. At the moment, one of the major steps that have been taken is that PN Africa, in partnership with the Pan-African Parliament, have actually set up the African Parliamentary Press Network, which is a network of journalists who report from well over 20 African countries that is intending to make sure that information about the PAP becomes more visible in member countries, and member parliamentarians from various countries to PAP are also held accountable on the things that they go to the Pan-African Parliament to do. So steps are being taken from the civil society side. Of course, it wouldn't be enough if we all do not get involved. We are hoping that these regional parliaments, just like some of the national parliaments, will be more receptive to parliamentary openness reforms that are being suggested to them. And I'm sure that in no time we'll be able to see some changes when it comes to openness, transparency, accountability, and citizens' participation at these regional parliaments, just like we are experiencing in some of the national parliaments.
Thank you very much, Sam, for the response. Can we have any addition from any of the panelists? If not, then Sam, you have to just come back again and give us the closing remarks to bring today's webinar to an end.
Very well, Gilbert. And yeah, I noticed that our advertised closing time is just due. And so let me take the opportunity to thank you all, our distinguished audience, for joining us for today's report launch and for hearing about these amazing examples or experiences from the 3 countries, and also the recommendations that have been made. In the chat box, Juan has shared the link to the report in the chat box. Of course, there will be a thank you email that will be coming to all of you because you registered, and this email will contain, the link again to the report so that you can have access to downloading the report and skimming through for yourself. I think that there's been some great thoughts that have been shared here by Philip, Regan, Maria, Juan, and Gilbert even moderating, as well as even some of the questions that came up. I would want to challenge Juan and Ben, our team members from both DL and PN Africa, to look at putting together some form of a post-event, write-up article that kind of encompasses some of these recent happenings and experiences from this event. But to thank Regan, Philip, Juan, Gilbert, Maria, and everybody for joining in for this conversation. We are very, very happy of what we have achieved together. But please mark your calendars, 30th of June, we will come back to you. The Open Parliament Index for West Africa will be launched, and we are hoping to see which of the countries rank high and which ones do not rank high so far as parliamentary openness is concerned. Thank you so very much, Gilbert, and over to you guys.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sam, for the opening closing remarks. And I also have to say a special thank you to Juan for not just presenting the report, but also supporting me to do the moderation for the panel session. And special thanks also go to Philip, Regan, and Kate, who is not here, but I'm sure she's going to get the outcome of today's meeting. And so till we meet again and we call on you again, it's goodbye from here. Juan?
I just want to say thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. It's been a very interesting discussion, and I'm honored to have been part of it. So thank you very much, and we'll keep in touch, and have a really nice Thursday.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye.